And I think most participants are already connected. While we wait for other participants to join, I think we can already get started with the session and introductions. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Danilo Cansado. I'm Program Officer, Green Infrastructure at the GCA. And I've been organizing this masterclass for you. Thank you, everyone that joined the session yesterday, the opening ceremony and keynote lecture with Stefan. It was a great start to the week and also the group activities that we had on both groups yesterday. I hope that you have enjoyed this first day of the masterclass and also that you enjoy today and the next days ahead in the week. Today we'll have the presentation of two key speakers, Gia Lee from the World Bank and Kees van Muiswinkel from the Rijkswaterstaat from the Netherlands. But without further ado, I would like to give the word to David, who you met yesterday and who will be moderator for the session. And David, before you just quickly introduce yourself and the speakers, just a reminder that the sessions are going to be recorded and that this is going to be available also at GCA's website after the masterclass. Thank you, and David, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're located. Thank you for joining us on the second day. Today, we're going to have very inspiring speakers who are going to continue with our discussion on climate resilient PPPs. I'd like to thank Danilo for making the introduction. In this first session, I will invite Gia Lee, who is a senior economist at the World Bank Climate Change Group, to make her presentation. She has expertise in economic analysis and stress testing of climate risk and infrastructure resilience and adaptation, including the resilience rating system that Stefan Hellegatter briefly mentioned yesterday. Today, Gia will be able to share more of this work with us and how this can serve as a tool for investors, infrastructure operators, and planners for identifying resilient projects. Thank you, Gia. The floor is yours, and you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Danilo, for the invitation. Very excited to be here, and nice meeting everyone. So while I speak, I will share my screen, and so you're able to see my screen, correct?
Yes, we can.
All right, wonderful. Yes, so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Very nice meeting you virtually. So today I will be mostly covering a new set of tools and methods that the World Bank Climate Group developed to have better evaluation of climate risks and also incorporation of adaptation resilience measures in investment projects. So the focus of my presentation would be looking at some context and background on the World Bank climate change commitment and some of the existing metrics that we evaluate climate performance of the bank's portfolios and investment projects, and provide an overview, as David mentioned earlier, of the new World Bank methods for rating resilience of projects, which is the resilience rating system, and also another methodology for conducting climate stress testing in project economic analysis, which can be part of the resilience rating system to support projects to consider climate risks and also adapting with resilience measures for project design. And I will give an example from our water sector project, which has a strong infrastructure component. And at the end, I will just highlight a few key takeaways from this effort. So as a little background, the World Bank recently, actually as of spring 2021, just published a second version of the Climate Action Plan for the next 5 years. And the action plan really has raised the ambition for climate actions for the whole World Bank Group, including increasing finance for that will increase climate co-benefits and also aligning financial flows of all the World Bank operations with Paris Agreement goals. So there's a strong component of increasing climate finance from the previous climate action plan of 26% of benefits to 35%, which would provide climate benefits. And the important component is really also mainstreaming adaptation and resilience. So as part of the climate finance commitment, 50% of all the financing would support adaptation resilience actions and providing benefits. So the plan also focused on a few transition in key sectors, all with strong infrastructure components, including energy, urban transportation, and also manufacturing, and also the broader landscape, looking at agriculture, water, land, and nature-based solutions. So as part of the commitment, there's also a demand and requirement for increasing our metrics for evaluating benefits from all the activities. So this is part of the conversation we have today. It's really how does the bank measure improvements in outcomes from our investments and activities, both for adaptation resilience and also on carbon and greenhouse gas emission side as well. And so I want to introduce to you the resilience rating system, which is actually a very new methods being developed by the bank's climate change group. So this is very much also, as we speak, we're still piloting the methodology, and really would be interested in feedback we're getting from all of you as well. So the goal of our resilience rating system is really better understanding the quality of adaptation in the bank's projects. And so we already have a set of metrics and methods to evaluate projects on their climate performance, including risk screening and evaluating the co-benefits of all the activities. But still, we would like to improve our evaluation and assessment. So therefore, this is the main motivation for developing the system. And we also like to see the resilience rating system not just being adopted by the bank for our internal operations, but also it could be used to support the client countries and also outside stakeholders and private sectors. So as of now, actually, we have been receiving tremendous interest in this method. Hopefully, we can have a dialogue to see, if this can be an approach that could be adopted more broadly. So as I mentioned, the methodology was published in early 2021, and we're currently testing the methods by piloting, the methods on a number of World Bank projects across different regions and covering a wide range of sectors and activities. So for this year, we picked 20 projects to conduct the rating. And so there's current discussion on, maybe I'll just go back. There's another slide on this. So the current discussion is thinking about how to use the resilience rating system to support the bank's policy commitment for Paris alignment. So, we're really trying to do this to increase incentives for adaptation activities and also, including through disaster resilience for infrastructure development. So what is resilience rating system? The resilience rating system, that was developed has two dimensions. And mostly, we want to rate projects for their resilience to climate risks and natural disasters to make sure the projects are, considered from the onset of the project design and evaluation. We also want to, consider the resilience of the project to the broader community for building, resilience for beneficiaries, for the host countries, and for local communities. So there's a second component, which is resilience through the project, and I will go through them. So for the resilience rating system, we have developed a rating from C to A based on the level of activities and effort from the project for considering climate risks and also considering adaptation responses. So at the minimum level, we would like to see the project being screened for basic climate and disaster risks. And there's evaluation qualitatively looking at residual risks from climate, and some assessment of a justification for whether the level of risk is accepted. So at that stage, the project will be rated for C for the resilience of the project. And if the project also consider and conduct risk assessment, which is more, more extensive by looking at different model projections and different climate scenarios, and also considering adaptation options for identified risks, and the project will be rated at B, as B. And if the project also consider quantitative stress testing to make sure the project is viable, economically under potential future climate change and also potential occurrence of natural disasters, and the project will be rated as A. And if the project, for the evaluation, also look at uncertainty, given that the future climate risk is quite uncertain, and the project would be rated with a plus. So, if the project does consider stress testing and also consider multiple climate scenarios and future uncertainty, the project will be rated as A+. And for the resilience fuel, a lot of the bank project will be automatically be considered to be C, because most of the bank activities and projects really have a strong goal of development and increasing local income and reduce poverty. So in this case, there's already, broader benefits that, the project will be rated as C for resilience through. And if the project also consider resilience building activities and also, activities that would reduce vulnerability, and at that point, the project will be rated as B. And we really, what we really like to see is all projects to be rated A, both for resilience of and resilience through. So for resilience through, in order to get an A, the project will have to demonstrate there's transformational benefits to not just build resilience for the project, for the community, but at broader level, to influence institutions and policies, and investing in new technologies or capabilities. So in that case, the project will be receiving an A. And we also have another additional criteria, for the resilience through evaluation, that if projects would consider to develop indicators to track performance, then the project will be rated with a plus. So so far for our projects that we have done the pilots, it seems it's actually not too difficult to get A for the bank projects for resilience through, but it's actually challenging to get A for the resilience of project because of a lot of the project evaluation, economic analysis do not necessarily include stress testing on climate risks. And it's, for many countries that are data poor, this is actually quite a challenging activity. So the main, goal, as I mentioned, for the resilience rating system is really to improve the bank's evaluation and tracking of progress towards adaptation and resilience, and also importantly, creating incentive to really engage for better adaptation, outcomes. Okay, so this was the slide I mentioned earlier. So currently we're at, we have a few objectives for piloting the resilience rating system. First is really for us to learn from, this new methods and to see how we can better standardize the process for rating and evaluating projects. So we're working across very different types of activities and projects and in different nature to understand what are the key components that we need to consider. So we're still actually in the process of improving the methods and the guidance. And if you all have feedback, we very much will be interested in receiving them. And the second objective is to continue to develop tools and data to support the resilience rating system. In particular, we have developed this risk stress testing tool and guidance that I will introduce a little bit later. And the third one, as I mentioned, is the broader consideration at the bank corporate level to really explore how we can use the resilience rating system for Paris alignment commitments for the bank. And there's ongoing discussion with other multilateral development banks as well. So this is all very much ongoing activities. Okay, so next I want to introduce another new method that we have developed and a set of tools for integrating climate risks and natural disasters in our economic analysis of projects. Stefan actually was the main author for this guidance, as well as the resilience rating system. So he probably alluded to this. So the guidance is more of a simplified method to conduct climate risk and disaster stress testing in economic analysis for projects. And this can be applicable to infrastructure investment projects as well, and other projects that consider, cost-benefit analysis and economic analysis. It's also a way to provide, a framework to think about how to incorporate uncertainty, future climate risks in decision-making process, and identify particularly, potential risk reduction, adaptation measures for the viability of the project design. All right, so our starting point for thinking about climate risk stress testing is the economic analysis being done for projects. And on the left-hand side, this is probably very familiar for everybody, that for most projects, I think there's a strong evaluation tradition to look at the economic desirability. Either you conduct cost-benefit analysis, looking at the net present value, or using other criteria to evaluate project, attractiveness. Another popular metric is the benefit cost ratio. So in this case, project will be evaluated both for their costs, looking at capital investment, operating costs, and other potential costs against, estimated benefits, which can be coming from, just the benefits from the project, or more broadly, societal benefits. For example, the reduction in congestion cost from transportation project, or, for energy project, it could be reduced air pollution, which will induce, have human health benefits, and potentially other categories being identified as the impacts of project. And along the way, so if we do consider climate risks and also natural disasters, these, risks can affect different channels of your costs and benefits for the project. For example, the temperature increase could potentially put stress on the infrastructure integrity. So there could be consideration for thinking about, construction standard and practice. Maybe additional investment will be needed for repair. and extreme events such as droughts and floods, hurricane could also affect the operation of the projects and potential benefit flows for the investment. And so, in this method, we consider 3 different dimensions of climate risks and also disaster risks. One is a change in the average climate conditions, such as temperature increase, water stress, and changes in precipitation pattern, how that influence, the infrastructure and the investment costs and potential benefits, and also extreme events, occurrence, such as heat waves, droughts, storm cyclones. And in addition, because of the, if anyone paid attention to the latest IPCC report that that was just published on the science, there's more and more evidence that the extreme events are connected, the occurrence also connected to climate change. So when temperature increases and the water cycle changes, the extreme events occurrence and intensity also are changing. So those we want to consider for the future condition as well. All right, so this is just a quick flow chart that goes through the steps for the stress testing. So our starting point, as I mentioned earlier, is really the baseline economic analysis. And in analysis, oftentimes, we do consider different assumptions, looking at optimistic set of assumptions versus pessimistic, and evaluate the project, financial flows and costs and benefits. And then we identify what are the climate risks and impacts and potential natural hazards that affect the project in this location that you will be developing. And here we also consider a set of potential outcomes that, the climate impacts can be maybe low, it could be high. As we, look into the future, there are many factors that could impact the climate trajectory as well, including what countries are doing with their mitigation, and also the social-economic development and other aspects that we can talk about. I will talk about the data assumptions we use for that type of analysis. And then we calculate based on the climate impacts to the project cost and benefit categories. We calculate revised net present value or other criteria for evaluating projects for all the scenarios. And then we can do another set of evaluation to say, well, is this economic outcome acceptable? If it is, and then we would conclude that the risks are acceptable with when we consider climate change and future disasters. And then at this point we will report the revised NPV and go on to the next steps of the project evaluation or design. And if the revised economic analysis shows that the outcome is not desirable, and then we want to do further analysis to look at, what are some of the scenarios that would actually ensue the project to be to fail, and what are the potential consequences, and are these scenarios considered to be plausible, or the consequences are significant that will require revision of the project. So if the outcome considered to be undesirable, then we want to go back to the design phase to reevaluate the project design. It could be the engineering standard, it could be the site selection, and consider the alternatives. And at that point, we will redo the analysis to evaluate project outcomes and go through this decision tree again. So at some point, there could be significant risks being identified for the project. And in this case, we might want to consider to do more sophisticated analysis. For example, for some of the large hydro power projects, there may be need to do sophisticated decision-making under uncertainty type of evaluation, looking at a wider range of scenarios. And we can also talk about that. That's not part of this methodology, but we do have additional methods being developed for considering more complicated cases as well. All right, so we have the risk stress testing guidance note. We also have developed a accompanying simplified Excel-based tool to actually conduct stress testing for projects. And so this tool is a useful template or starting point to consider climate risks. It's possible your project have already been developing methods and tools and data. I'm sorry, there's a cat getting up very early. But the template could be a useful starting point to consider different categories of climate change and disaster risks. And we do have a link in the presentation. I have a link that shows you where you can find the tool and some of the training videos as well. That might be of interest. So here, I just wanted to quickly go through an example of stress testing to showcase how we actually do this. So here's an example of a water security project in Honduras. This was a bank project that we conducted additional stress testing based on the economic analysis. So the project actually is quite complex. There are a few different components, which includes irrigation and water supply and sanitation, and also a dam project to increase the storage capacity of a local reservoir. So, there are components and benefits to the local community for water supply, agricultural production, and also hydroelectric power supply as well. So the infrastructure project have different components, and the project team already conducted their estimates of the costs and benefits. And so we, as a starting point, the baseline economic analysis considered both the optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. This is a set of flow that we estimated that looks at both the capital and operating cost and the benefit flow for the project. So the project as of now looks to be very attractive with significant net present value benefits and also favorable benefit cost ratio. And here we want to also consider climate then. So the climate risks for Honduras. The panel on the left shows the historical pattern of temperature, and the panel on the right shows potential future changes in both temperature and precipitation. It's probably not so easy to see, but here the idea is if you look out in the future, I believe we were looking at 2050, the data under different climate scenarios. You will see the distribution of this temperature change and precipitation pattern actually vary quite a bit. So there's a larger range of uncertainty. So these are all data coming from the bank's climate change knowledge portal, and you would have access to as well. So a lot of the information would be needed to support analysis. And for the natural disaster in Honduras, for the project site, we have major concerns about droughts and floods. So it is, it's water variability. And so for the analysis, we consider a set of climate impacts. So the table on the right bottom corner shows all the assumptions that we're using to look at impacts from temperature change on crop yields impact and temperature change on water supply, and also the impact of drought on hydroelectricity production, and impacts of flood on infrastructure and the construction costs and repair costs. Here I'm also listing the sources for information that may be of interest to you on the changes in future climate conditions. As I mentioned, the bank has a very nice climate change knowledge portal that provides data both at the national level and subnational level and geo-referenced, looking at changes in temperature, precipitation under different climate scenarios, and other key climate risk indicators that may be relevant for your application. And for disaster risks, the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction has a really nice database called Think Hazard that really by country, for each country, there's a nice summary looking at the different level of disaster risks, which can be used to guide the analysis. So this exercise I'm showing is using data from both the Climate Change Knowledge Portal and Think Hazard. So for changes in average conditions, we make a set of assumptions on what is the impact on the cost and the benefits, including the operating maintenance cost increase to the investment cost changes. And for the benefits, we also, as I mentioned, the set of assumptions we use to estimate potential changes in the project benefit flows from the income from agricultural production to irrigation, water availability and price, to the power operation. So I just want to quickly show you some this is a kind of a snapshot of the risk Excel tool, and you will be able to access the template from the bank website as well. So this is looking at a drought, I think. I couldn't see the top, how that changes under different climate scenarios and the intensity of hazard occurrence. What are the implications for the project, costs and benefits? So these are the assumptions being made. And this is looking to the future, when we project into the future, looking at the potential occurrence of disastrous events. We also, have a set of assumptions that can be made in the tool to look at the impacts. So this is just a summary of the stress testing analysis that we looked at, from the baseline scenario of optimistic and pessimistic of the project. We added climate change impacts. So here, under both the low and high potential climate impacts, we're still seeing the project is desirable with positive net present value and also benefit cost ratio, which are above, about 1.5. Yeah, so this is another way to look at the analysis by looking at different components of the economic analysis that might be sensitive to both the climate change and also natural disasters. These are all output from the tool, which is a very easy way to look at the relative contribution of changes, to know where, additional analysis may be needed and where, the results may be more sensitive to. Okay, so the last thing I want to just quickly talk about is this looking at the switching scenarios. So when we think about the risk and uncertainty, this graph on the left is really showing this space of uncertainty. Also looking at the baseline assumptions, that's the x-axis, and the y-axis is looking at climate and disaster risks. So, the tool can provide some analysis looking at the uncertainty space and where the project economics may become to be undesirable, which can help guide additional, analysis and the project design modification. Okay, I'm not sure how I'm doing with time because I couldn't see. Maybe David already sent me 5 messages to remind me. So the key takeaway is there are large uncertainties in future climate potential events and their impacts. We don't know exactly how the climate will unfold, but what we do want to do is when we evaluate projects and do project design, we want the projects to be robust under any potential future conditions. So that's why there's, there's benefits of doing stress testing to look at under different conditions how the project will do. So in this case, we want to consider as wide as possible a range of future conditions to conduct the stress testing. And we also want to consider the climate and disaster risks evaluation throughout the project cycle, from the beginning, from project design to thinking about analysis, evaluation, also to implementation as well, and the monitoring and evaluation. Those are all would be very important because the future conditions will not be stationary, and we want to make sure that the whole project design is also adaptable, that consider and the anticipated future conditions. There are other considerations for best practices for cost-benefit analysis. Those are just some of the things we learned from our own pilot team. And so this is the presentation. And I just want to say by the end of the day, our goal is not just to rate project and evaluate project, is really to do good projects. And if all the projects are designed to be resilient, and I think then the whole system, the whole would be better off. So thank you so much, and apologies if I did use up more time. Are we good?
Thank you, Gia. We appreciate your presentation. It was very insightful. I'm going to allow one question before we move on to Kees's presentation. Herman Wijnands, you have a question. If you could unmute and ask the question directly, we'd appreciate that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm Herman Wijnands. I'm working for the Rijkswaterstaat, the Netherlands Agency for Roads and Waterways. And I had a question because I'm interested in to what extent the RRS model is applied to your project. So do you actually set a goal, for example, to say to your project managers to use the system and make a certain percentage of all World Bank projects rating like BB, for example, or AA, which is of course very ambitious?
Yeah, so far we have been getting really positive feedback from the project teams. The rating for AA, actually, we have not seen. That's the goal. We would like to help all projects to get to AA. And so far, I think many projects maybe it's more like BA, or in some cases, maybe even C. So it's still quite a ways to go for us as well to get to where we need to be. And I think it depends on the sector as well. So some sectors, just really varies quite a bit. For water sectors and some natural resource management projects, the project teams are very good at already considering climate risks. So they have very sophisticated models to look at decision-making under deep uncertainty. So our real goal is really to bring everyone up to the level, at least a level we can consider stress testing, and then introduce, better best practices.
Thank you very much for that feedback. It's time to move on to the next presentation. We will have a session at the end of this session to allow additional questions, so don't despair if your questions weren't asked. Thank you, Gia, for the presentation and discussion. We're now moving over to Kees van Muiswinkel, who's a senior advisor on climate adaptation, of road infrastructure at the Rijkswaterstaat, and then the roads, which is the Roads and Water Agency of the Netherlands. He is an expert on stress testing of infrastructure and is going to share more about the Dutch expertise in this field. Kees, thank you. The floor is yours. Kees, you're on mute.
Yes, I'm not now. Am I visible?
We can see your presentation. If you can just go into full screen.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, this is it.
If you can click the icon on the bottom right hand, it gives the full screen because we're seeing your...
Sorry, what are you seeing?
We are seeing your presentation with slides on the left. We're not seeing the... So if you go to the bottom right hand side, you'll see a thing that looks like a little screen. You can click on that. Yeah. You've cut yourself out.
Just a moment, yeah. Is better?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you so much for the honor and opportunity to speak to you in this masterclass. And I'll tell you about the Dutch approach of climate change adaptation of infrastructure. And
Kees, before we start, sorry to interrupt, I think your camera is not on, or we cannot see you.
Yeah, click on again. Yeah,
great,
better.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm just struggling a bit with my screens, so sorry about that. Okay, you see now the screen with the Netherlands?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, yes. Yeah, somehow I lost my notes, but it will be okay. Yes, just shortly, where is the Netherlands? It's in Europe, as you may know, and it's a small country. It's a delta of the rivers, the Rhine and the Meuse. It's densely populated, and 60% of our country is prone to flood, both by the sea, but also from the rivers. And the larger part of our economy is actually in these flood-prone areas, so which is a challenge. And so, yes, we have been used to live with the water for ages and ages, and actually large parts of our countries have been reclaimed from the sea, as you can see on the picture on the left, on the top. And this also means that we have been used to floods, major floods, with a lot of losses. And actually this led to some important projects. I will tell you a bit about that later. For example, in 1916, there was a major flood leading to the building of the Oslide, and we had the big flood in 1953, which led to our famous Delta works. So, but it's not only a challenge, but also we love the water. We live with the water. It's very important for our economy, for the harbors and in shipping. And it's also, we like to live along the water and have recreation. So it has two sides to it. And I work for Rijkswaterstaat, which is the executive part of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management in the Netherlands. And we build, maintain, and manage the highway network, the waterways, and also the water systems, which include the storm surges. While doing this, we have to deal with an uncertain future. We don't know how the economy will be in politics. And yeah, we'll all agree that nobody could have predicted what the impact of, for example, the COVID epidemic would have been. Also, mobility in general is evolving. There are a lot of technological developments also with mobility. And in some ways, it can make us more dependent on electricity and telecom. And that means that we may also be more vulnerable to climate change because that causes extreme weather. So how do we deal with that in the Netherlands? Well, we have climate change adaptation policy, and I'll touch on that a bit. So we have the Delta program, which obviously also came from this 1953 flood. So very important is water safety, because we are largely prone to flood. We love to be safe, so we like to reduce risks. And for this water, this means that we deal with storms, and also obviously due to climate change, we have to deal with sea level rise and also higher river discharges. Actually, we had a couple of dry years, the 3 previous years, but this year was very wet, and we had major floods in the southern part of our country, causing major damage. So we have to live with these extremes on both sides. The other program is also about fresh water, to provide enough drinking water for everybody. It's also important to manage the fresh water against salt intrusion, which is important for our agriculture. But also the water is obviously important for the shipping and thus also for the economy. And lastly, it's also about climate change adaptation. So from the Delta program, we have the Delta Division for Spatial Adaptation, which says by 2050, and that's already in 30 years, we want to be climate proof and water resilient in the Netherlands. And that means that starting from now, we need to take actions and have policy to achieve this goal. And there is special attention to our vital infrastructure, not only roads and waterways, but also things like, well, for example, electricity, drinking water, telecom, etc. Also, we have our national adaptation policy, which follows from the European Union policy, but I will not touch on that in this presentation. So as Rijkswaterstaat, we implement this policy, and we do that through our so-called Climate Resilient Networks program. And that means, also as Rijkswaterstaat, we want to be climate proof by 2050 and water resilient. And to that goal, we have a program which starts with stress testing our network. So where are we vulnerable to the extreme weather? We have risk dialogues about these stress tests. We actually are right in the middle of this process, having these dialogues to validate the results of the stress test, but also to talk with the stakeholders. So what are the most important risks? What are the impacts? And what are which locations are affected, and which level of resilience do we think is acceptable? Because we can take a lot of measure, but we don't have unlimited budgets, so we need to make choices. So in this way, by having these dialogues, we work towards hotspots. We have developed lists of possible measures, and right now we are working on an action plan and an implementation agenda. Just to tell you a bit about what we look, I will focus a bit more on our highway stress test. We look, there's several threats and hazards we are looking at. For example, the effects of extreme rainfall, which can lead to flooding of the road, which you can see on the left, but also erosion of embankments, which can cause damage to our roads. The possible impacts of flooding, both from the rivers and from the coast. Heat, we had record heat also last year, which caused problems with the bridges wouldn't close, which means problems for both road traffic, but also for the shipping. And drought can lead to fires along the road, and on the long term will cause more soil subsidence, which also causes a lot of damage to our infrastructure. So this is the things we look at, and this leads to maps. And it's great to have these stress test results, because at the beginning of a project, you know what the challenges are. And we also have investigated different scenarios. So starting a project, when having these stress test results, this helps to the stakeholders to think about these challenges and think about the measures. So for example, on this map, you can see the calculated repair costs after flooding. You can imagine this helps to plan and prioritize projects. Another example, so we have these maps for also all these threats and hazards. And this is an example. This shows the middle part of the Netherlands. On the top, you can see in Amsterdam. And you can see when this is a worst case map, when all floods happen together. But you can see there can be very flooding up to 5 meters deep, which also floods the roads. You can imagine what the impact is for the traffic, but also for people and economy in general. So it's really important to have this insight. And I told you about these risk dialogues, and you can imagine we want, with our limited budgets, we want to put our efforts there where it is most important. So through the stress test and the assessment of risks, we like to make focus on issues that have a high probability and a big impact. For example, these steel bridges that wouldn't close due to heat, they have a huge impact. So we want to take measures focus on that. On the other hand, for example, flooding on the roads a lot, but the impact is less big because it only happens in a couple of hours and the water will just run away. So this is just, the stress test also helps us to make, and the dialogues help us to make these choices. Now, how does this relate to the PPP project cycle, which you can also find in the handbook you are studying this week? And I'd like to tell about this. And I think this really, so this sort of shows how our system relates to this PPP cycle. I'd like to touch on some aspects of that. Firstly, when you have the identification phase, the stress test helps to show where are the risks and what is the this doesn't mean there are no uncertainties. Obviously there are uncertainties, but it's by having the different scenarios in the stress test, this helps to as an input for the appraisal phase. And then next is the appraisal phase. And this is a phase wherein you actually look, well, what sort of challenges are there? What are possible measures? It is nice. It's nice to have, when you do this, it's good to have best practices and lessons learned, and they are widely available. I think World Bank just told about that, but worldwide there are lots of best practices. It's really good to use these best practices, which will help you to think of better solutions. And in the same time, and in this map you can see a map of Rijkswaterstaat iconic projects, which shows where projects take into account sustainability and climate change adaptation. I will tell you about some examples later on. In the tender and award phase, I think it's important to challenge the contractors to innovate, to think about adaptive solutions. And it's very important to actually also tell, so what will be the standards where you will evaluate the projects. So if you set these standards, this will also help to actually achieve the goals you have been setting in the appraisal phase. For example, in this picture, you see solar panels, which were part of a project, which we had in the Netherlands project. And then in the contract management phase, it's very important also when the project is already there, it's very important to actually do maintenance. And we have found that if you don't maintain your water discharging facilities, it can actually lead to flooding. So it's very important to do maintenance, but also to monitor and to evaluate and register all sorts of events. So for the next phase, you can actually adapt to these changing conditions and maybe think of different solutions. Starting now, I would like to give some examples. How do we take into account climate change adaptation in the Netherlands and how we deal with projects? This is example of the A1 motorway, which is very near to this actual location is very near to Amsterdam, a pretty part of the Netherlands, but also very busy, as you can see. And on the left, you can see the old motorway with a bridge over the river. And you can imagine this causes problem for traffic, and it was too narrow, so it caused a lot of traffic congestion. So on the right, you can see sort of detour of the motorway which was made without a bridge. They actually made an aqueduct with concrete under the river. So this obviously helps to accommodate more traffic, but at the same time what we have done is take into account other interests like shipping, for example, less obstruction for shipping, but also ecology. There's a ecological route on the below part of the aqueduct. You can actually see a part which is now a part of an ecological route to accommodate all sorts of animals traveling by. Also take into account climate change. We have more precipitation, so we also designed to account for all the extra water that comes off the road. And this also helps to in our water management of the area, because as you can imagine, all the fields you can see actually are below water level. And so water management is very important. So all these interests are taken into account in this project. Next, I will tell you about the Oslide dike project. It's a 32-kilometer long dike, which was built after the 1916 flood. And it has been protecting large parts of our country for 90 years now. But after 90 years, the dike needs regeneration to meet up to the safety standards. So by 2050, it has to meet to the Water Act, which means it will have to accommodate a 1 in 10,000 storm. And because I told you, large part of our economy are in the flood-prone areas, so we don't want us to flood. So that's why we have these high standards. And so that's actually, at the moment, we are working on this project. And there are 3 ways in which we accommodate to the future. First thing is we reinforce the dike, so to meet with a 1 in 10,000 storm. You can see it is highly improved. There are innovative concrete blocks which will accommodate this storm, and in this way it will be not a problem if the water actually overtops over the road, because it will not actually damage the dike. The next thing is that so here you actually see these innovative concrete blocks, and this will accommodate. In general, the dike is 2 meters higher than it's used to be. Another thing which is very important, that we need to be able to discharge more water, because due to climate change we have more river discharge. And you can imagine, combined with sea level rise and also storms, it can happen that the water cannot be discharged from the IJsselmeer to the sea. So there are 2 extra discharging sluices are built, and also there are 2 pumping stations extra. And on this picture you can see why. So you can see on the 3 diagrams on below that, for example, if the sea level is higher than the IJsselmeer, we actually lower the gates. And with the low tide, we can actually put up the gates so the IJsselmeer can discharge its water. But you can imagine where there are long periods of storm, and also with sea level rise, it will sometimes be very difficult to actually lower the IJsselmeer level to the desired level, because if it doesn't do that, we may have floods along the IJsselmeer, the lake. So for that reason, we have also installed pumps. So in this way, we can adapt to these changing conditions and climate change. We also, in the same time, because it's not only dike, but also accommodates an important motorway, the northern part of our country. And we also use this regeneration of the dike to actually improve the roads to let it meet to the current standards for the motorway, because the old motorway was also already quite old. So it needed some improvements. So this shows the way the new design of the road, which meets to the new Dutch standards. Lastly, another way to accommodate, we also take into account the interests of nature. The dike, as you can imagine, is a barrier to fish like trout and salmon. So there's a new facility is being built to accommodate fish migration, which will be, so it will also be give an increase of nature value. And on the next picture, you can see an aerial view, a diagram of this migration fish river, which will actually allow fish to swim through the dike without causing problems for the safety of the dike. Well, the work is still in progress at the moment, so the strengthening of the dike, but also the building of the new discharging sluices and pump station will be finished by 2023, and the total project will be finished in 2025. And this is done in combination with all regional partners, government partners, but also with a company, obviously, that's doing all this work. So it's a really icon project, and so if you come to Holland, please come and see it. Last example I would like to give, it's another dike, also in the IJsselmeer, and it's I like to show this because it's a nature-based solution design. So as you could see with the Oslide dike, we have been using concrete to reinforce the dike, because nature-based solutions were not feasible in that case. But this dike, it was. This was also a dike which had to meet with the new water safety standards. And instead of concrete, we actually used sand, which we dug out from the lake on the left. You can see, if you can see well on the right, you can see the road, which is also an important road. And this dike has been strengthened with sand on both sides, which works really well. We actually use a lot of sand in Holland to keep our water safety in shape, just instead of building hard dikes. And it's actually cheaper, more flexible, and it's also good for nature. And as you can see on the left, you can see some islands. So we used sludge that was left when we dug the sand to make islands, and they are both for recreation but also very good for nature. So it's a wonderful place to be actually at the moment. And I think this is a really nice example of nature-based solutions that are possible, not only in the Netherlands. Just to finish off with some conclusions. And obviously, you can imagine I've told about some examples, and there's much more to say about this. And welcome to ask questions about that. I think I try to tell you that when you look at this PPP cycle, it is important to address resilience and think about possibilities for resilience in all phases of a project, starting with identification all the way up to the maintenance and the management of the projects, but also all the phases in between. Data and knowledge is very essential, but I think also essentially explained that you can do this on different levels. So I think in Holland we have a lot of data available, and we are very advanced in calculating risk, but also with limited data, there are lots of possibilities and tools available. But you need to know to calculate the risk and think in advance. And we have learned also it's good to challenge the partners, the contractors, to think of innovative and adaptive solutions, especially when it comes to climate change adaptation. And it gives better solutions, but it's also good for the companies and nice for the companies to be able to bring in their knowledge and their innovations. And collaboration and working together with partners is very important. This helps to give actually support for the projects, and this also helps to think of all the interests you would like to take into account. For example, what I told about, so you have both economy, traffic, reduce congestion, but at the same time think of the importance of shipping, the importance of nature, which is important for our well-being and for our planet, and also for the safety, for example, for the water management. All these interests can be taken into account in the project. So flexibility is very important, and that I think innovation can lead to that. And there are lots of possibilities and examples of that. That's what I like to say, and I hope now my presentation doesn't move on to the last slide somehow. I don't know what happens. But if you would like, I will be happy to answer any questions. And for example, also about the Oslide project, the area manager will be very happy to give more information on that if people interested in all the different parts of that. And for example, also the Houterdijk dike with the nature-based solutions, there are also experts who will be very happy to tell about that. And myself, I'm involved in this Climate Resilient Networks program, and also lots to say about that. So that is what I like to share right now. And I think I'll stop sharing my screen, see if that works.
David, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Kees. It was a great pleasure to follow your presentation, and it was quite a bit of a homecoming for me. My great-grandfather was one of the engineers that worked on the Oslide dike, so it was really interesting to see the modern technology, because I have seen many of the pictures of sort of the wicker mattresses that they laid down on the Oslide dike and the rock they piled on top of it. So glad to see that technology is moving forward and that the Netherlands is a great leader in that field. Kees, I just had one question for you before I open up to others. Please, if the presenters could turn on their videos so that we can see your faces, and if you do have a question, you can give me an indication in the chat box, and then we will, please remember to unmute yourself and to ask the question directly. But Kees, I just had a question in the sense of, the Netherlands is fortunate in some ways that it's a small country and it's a technology leader. So, it has a great reach with its, with its monitoring technology, etc. Other countries, which especially Delta countries, which you could see in India, Myanmar, and places even in Africa, don't have access to the greatest technology. Could you give just some simple words of advice, what you could do just from a fundamental ground level approach if you don't have this technology available, some strategies you could employ to, be adaptive and more resilient in your planning? So that's the question.
Yeah, that's a great question and hard to answer for a Dutchman. Yes, yeah, I agree. We are really fortunate, obviously, and but I think when it comes to that, it is, I think, first place it's important to assess the actual risks, and I think that is possible. And I would say when it comes to solutions, I think nature-based solutions are I would say the first option one would need to consider, because it makes you more flexible, and you actually make use of the nature forces itself. But in the same time, I think we do need to acknowledge that living along the coasts will be an increasing challenge due to sea level rise. We even as the Netherlands, we are thinking on the long term. If it really goes up, we really need to consider how we actually plan how we do the plan the space spatially. So where would you actually locate cities so I think that's really important to consider. Also to look for the farther future. Will this be able to maintain?
Yeah, thank you. I know that, for example, what's recently happened here in the United States in the Louisiana, the Delta around New Orleans, that I think there's a lot of lessons learned that could be introduced. Hopefully, there's great collaboration. I know the Rijkswaterstaat has worked with New Orleans in the past, and this is a good example possibly of international collaboration as well, where, we live in a common world where all parties should be sharing ideas and expertise and best practices.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, the Netherlands work together with the United States, for example, with the U.S. Army Corps. And,
yeah. I have America Bendito. If you can unmute and ask your question, we'd appreciate that. You still on mute? There we are. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Well, very good presentation, both. Thank you very much. And well, as an engineer, I always admire all the work that the Holland and the Netherlands have been doing. And I would like to know if you can share maybe some links of the projects that you have been working or you are allowed to share with us, so we can have like a good reference of those projects, if it's possible. Thank you.
yes, I was somehow not able to share my last slide, but my contact details are all there. But also of the area manager of the Oslide project. And I will also share my presentation. And there were some notes which I was not able to read during my presentation, but that will also give some more information. But surely I will, what I can share, I will.
Thank you very much. Jeff Manalo, you have a question. Could you unmute and ask the question?
Yeah, hi, can you?
We can see you and we can hear you. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So, well, I was just asking, while I get that embedding this analysis and the use of these tools to, to make the projects more climate resilient are worthwhile exercises given their strategic benefits. Based on experience, how much time is normally added to the entire project development timeline if we are to do these things versus the traditional way of developing?
Yeah, maybe I will take a stab at Jeff's question. It's definitely taking more time. I think it's a combination of time, data, and expertise. Even, for some of the pilots we were doing at the bank, it definitely is showing it requires a lot of experience, both understanding of climate impacts and knowing where the data are. And in some of the developing countries where there's not a lot of data, it's not easy to do. So it does require some expert judgment and input. So very much, I think it depends on, the current structure of the project and the team. Do you have people with relevant, maybe backgrounds or experience to do that? And if not, there needs to be additional work. So I would say, yes, it's not an easy thing to do, even though it sounds, straightforward. When you have a spreadsheet, you can put in data. It's hard to estimate the time, but I would say this is also important to think about as a process that, I think all project teams and the managers should be thinking about these issues. Maybe, currently a project doesn't have that expertise, but it's this is a dialogue, just a question David was asking Kees earlier too. I think there's a role for the public sector and there's a role for private sector. And, the public sector, there's an important role to play in providing the information to make the data available and accessible in the sense that it's at the right scale. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So hopefully, together we can have more of a correlation and information sharing and have this kind of a knowledge exchange that over time will become to be, easier and more mainstream.
Thank you very much. There's a question that touches on a thought that I was having is, in a country where there's a national strategy and a national approach, the question is, how do you involve subnational entities and municipalities, for example? And Lisette van der Kamp has a good question in this regard. And Lisette, if you could unmute and ask your question, we'd appreciate it.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the nice presentation. It was mentioned by Omar that we have these strong independent water boards, or not completely independent, but at least they are not selected every 4 years, and they're it's a very strong body for these types of projects to go well. This is quite a challenge in many development countries where we work for, to have this kind of independent body, these water bodies. Can you explain maybe a bit about the role, and also maybe you have experience in development countries on this part? Thank you.
Yes, so shall I try to give an answer? Yes, so just to I think in Holland, I'm not sure if it's, we have a long history of working with water boards. So our first water boards were actually originate from more than 1,000 years ago. People working together because they had a common goal to keep dry feet. So people work together to actually build dikes to keep each other dry. So this also, I think this is the reason why in Holland we are actually used to working together on this. And we have, as the national government, also the local, have a common goal to keep our water safety in place. So that's number one. When we talk, I told you about the stress tests. We have stress tests about roads, and also, for example, roads during floods. We want to know, well, do we want to take measures on our roads to help to keep them available, for example, during floods and for evacuation. And we have what we call external dialogue. So we talk, as Rijkswaterstaat, we talk with other managers of roads. So Rijkswaterstaat manages the motorways, but for example, the provinces and the municipalities manage the smaller roads, but also the water boards that are responsible for water safety also manage roads. And we talk together and look, well, do we have common challenges, and can we work together to work towards this road system? I think having these dialogues and thinking about common challenges, and also think, well, can we maybe put the money or the budget we have available, can we make it better to get a more efficient and better solution?
Thank you very much. Gia, I do have a question for you regarding, the World Bank's approach and the tools that it is creating. Are these being shared or harmonized with other development banks and other donors? What is their receptivity towards your tools? Because I know there's great collaboration. I was just interested from that aspect.
Yeah, that's a good question. Stefan would be a better person to answer the question, because I'm actually relatively new at the bank. I used to work at the US government. So on a lot of this methodology development, I think there's a tremendous amount of collaboration and coordination, particularly now around the topic of Paris alignment. that all the multilateral development banks are developing methodologies for thinking about how do you evaluate your either performance or investment or projects for both for mitigation and also for adaptation. So there has been a lot of work around that. I think different banks may have different tools to to do the evaluation, but the principles are all coordinated. And on the stress testing, I think it's probably also even within the bank there's a diversity too. Different sectors may use different tools. So we're adding some of the tools to support teams that are further behind, so to speak, so they have something like an easy starting point.
Thank you very much. Talking about other banks, Gary Krishnan from the Asian Development Bank had a question. Gary, if you could just unmute and ask your question, we'd appreciate to hear that. Gary?
Yeah, I think, thank you for both presentations. They're really excellent. I think Jia has already answered the question, but my question was this. It's at present, we really need these tools because a lot of climate change and disaster risk is not added. So it needs to be highlighted. But I suppose the end goal is for everyone to include this risk as standard practice. And so it's, in a way, it's counterproductive, but when we eventually see these risks being included, then we've achieved something, but it's not high. Right now, we have to highlight these risks. But so looking at it from a helicopter perspective, should there be any other, Ms. Jia indicated that the cost of ignoring these risks can be overwhelming. So is there, looking forward, is there any other kind of risk that we should be incorporating now that we could possibly, have such eventful or impact on the projects? Thank you.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you, Gary, for the comment. And I agree with you. I think it's true. A lot of projects probably are not currently considering climate risks. And I think it's important to highlight these issues from the beginning. Like Kees and I have the same concluding slide, and it's pretty consistent. I think we would all agree that you want to consider risk from the onset of project identification and design and evaluation, and also throughout the cycle too. So, the framework that I presented, it's a general framework that could be, applied to other risks as well. It's just how we consider different risks. Project probably already do a lot of that already. Consider, your market condition and other uncertainties. When the bank invests or develop projects in a country, we have to consider the institutional risks and whether the project will have the return. So all these are traditionally already being considered. And I can see that if you were talking about outside the climate and disaster risks, these can be applied and extended as well. And this goes back to the question Jeff was asking earlier too, how much time does it take to add this another component, which, we hear about that as well. Project teams do not necessarily want to add more work when they do the project, preparation. But I would argue that, the investment we spend upfront, even if it's a little additional time, would definitely be worthwhile. Consider, what the potential impacts might be down the road.
Thank you.
So we can afford failures.
Okay, thank you very much. Omar, I didn't want to ignore you. You had asked a question right at the beginning, and so you're lucky on the draw to be the last person to ask the question. If you could just ask the original question that you asked, and I gather that was directed to Jia. So if you can unmute and share your screen. Great, thank you, we can see you.
Yeah, thank you. She actually did respond privately to my question, but it was about the RSS system and if it's something that could be used for non-World Bank projects. I had mentioned to her privately a project that we're working on, and it was quite an interesting one that we can use for some greenfield developments. But the question is, who would do the review of the actual scoring, whether it's a third-party assurance or if the World Bank themselves would be able to do something like that.
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting point. The bank probably would not be reviewing or rating project outside the bank, but really this is an approach we would like to see more uptake. So if more entities are taking up at least the principle, and this probably is done in some of the financing, activities in space as well. So like the S&P rating. If there's a body, maybe a third party that would take up rating, and then your rating of A or AA really means something, and this can help. It's another kind of stamp to for the project to go for financing. Maybe there will be another more attractiveness for the conditions. So that's a really interesting point, and I think this will require broader conversation as well. We have been in conversation with some coalitions, and they very much would like to do things like that. But this is all in early stage of discussion and development. And we'll be very happy to be involved in more discussions if you have interest.
Thank you very much. It's time to wrap up. So some of the takeaways from the presentation, there are solutions. You don't have to use high-tech solutions as well. The nature-based solutions I found particularly interesting, where we can leverage nature as it exists to introduce resilience. I think what I found fascinating, and I didn't know this case, was that some of these water management boards or bodies have been operating for over 1,000 years in the Netherlands, which I find fascinating. It seems that, there was a national will to do something because it was a matter of survival. It wasn't really a choice. And I think this is where the world stands as it is now. Best practices have been identified, tools have been identified. And so for the participants, I really ask you to reach out to the presenters and ask them questions. I'm sure that they would be quite willing to share their expertise, insights, knowledge, and direct you to places where you can find new best practice that will enhance your projects. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over just to Danilo for a closeout comment. Thank you very much for everyone, and we appreciated your participation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gia. Thank you, Kees, for the presentations. I think they were very insightful, and I hope that all participants also were able to get some ideas on how can we assess climate risk infrastructure and also improve the resilience of the infrastructure systems you are developing. Thank you also, David, for the moderation. Just a quick note to say that both presentations are already available on our Google Drive folder, as well as the presentation from Stefan from yesterday. And as long as we go with the sessions today and also in the other days of the masterclass, all the content will be available in the Google Drive. And shortly after the masterclass, you will also have access to all the recordings of the sessions. So with that, and actually to just conclude the session, I would like to just take the traditional picture with all the participants of the masterclass